You spend 8 hours a day at a job to afford food that someone else grew, packaged, and shipped to you. You wake up to an alarm, not to your own body. You worry about money before you've even gotten out of bed. For most of human history, none of that was true. For roughly 290,000 years, Homo sapiens lived without bosses, rent, schedules, or stored grain. Then, about 12,000 years ago, something changed. Humans started planting seeds on purpose, on a large scale, for the first time. Historians call this the agricultural revolution. And for most of the last century, the story we've told about it is simple. Humans were starving, scattered, and desperate, until farming saved us. But what if that story is backwards? What if agriculture wasn't humanity's rescue, but its biggest mistake? In 1987, evolutionary biologist Jared Diamond published an essay with a blunt title, "The Worst Mistake in the History of the Human Race." He wasn't talking about war. He wasn't talking about disease. He was talking about farming. To understand why, you first have to understand what life actually looked like before it. In the 1960s, anthropologist Richard Lee spent months living among the Jew/Hoansi people of the Kalahari Desert in southern Africa, one of the last surviving hunter-gatherer societies on Earth. He expected to find a population on the edge of starvation. Constant labor, desperate scavenging from sunrise to dark. Instead, he found something almost nobody predicted. The Jew/Hoansi worked, on average, around 15 to 20 hours a week to meet their food needs. The rest of the time went to resting, talking, storytelling, and raising children together. Lee called it affluence without abundance. No surplus, no stockpiles, but also no chronic scarcity, and none of the constant low-grade stress about tomorrow that defines so much of modern life. Decades later, anthropologist James Sussman lived among the same Jew/Hoansi communities and documented the same pattern. People worked in short bursts, not long shifts. Food got shared freely the moment it was caught or gathered, because nobody had a way to store it for long anyway. Hunger existed. It just wasn't the daily, looming threat people assumed. This wasn't a fluke limited to one desert. Similar patterns turned up in hunter-gatherer groups studied across the Amazon, the Arctic, and Australia. Most worked fewer hours per week than a modern part-time job. Diets were strikingly varied, sometimes over 100 different plant and animal species eaten across a single year in one region. And almost none of the work was solitary. Hunting happened in groups. Gathering happened with relatives. Even rest was communal. So picture a single day. You wake when the light changes, not when a sound demands it. There's no rent due, no inbox, no meeting at 9. By mid-morning, a small group heads out together to dig roots, pick fruit, and check old gathering grounds, the walk doubling as conversation the whole way. By early afternoon, the heat is too intense to keep moving, so everyone retreats to shade and waits it out. As evening comes, the group gathers around a fire. Whatever was caught or gathered that day gets divided among everyone present, not hoarded by whoever found it. Sharing isn't generosity in the modern sense. It's insurance. Today you share your kill. Tomorrow, when you come back empty-handed, someone shares theirs with you. There's no debt, no grain that can spoil from mismanagement, no boss deciding what your day is worth. Just enough, again and again, distributed by the group instead of stored by an individual. Then agriculture arrived. And here's the part that surprises most people. When archaeologists exhumed and studied skeletons from some of the earliest farming settlements, places like Catalhoyuk, in what is now modern-day Turkey, one of the first large permanent farming communities in human history, they didn't find healthier humans. They found shorter ones. Average human height actually dropped after populations shifted to agriculture in multiple regions across the world, and in some places didn't recover for thousands of years. Skeletons from early farming villages show more signs of malnutrition than the hunter-gatherers who came before them, more dental disease from a diet suddenly dominated by starchy grain, and more wear and stress fractures from repetitive physical labor in the fields. Living in permanent settlements also meant living in close, crowded proximity for the first time, often right alongside livestock. That closeness is where many of humanity's worst diseases first crossed over from animals into people, the kind scientists now call zoonotic diseases, meaning diseases that originate in animals and jump to humans. Early strains of measles, influenza, the seeds of outbreaks that would shape entire centuries. So why did humans ever make the switch? Not because farming made individual lives better. It made food more predictable, but in a much narrower form. Fewer species, more dependence on a single crop succeeding. What it did extremely well was produce more total calories per acre of land than foraging ever could. And more calories meant something specific. More children could survive. Populations that farmed grew faster than populations that didn't. Here's the twist almost nobody talks about. Agriculture didn't spread because it was good for the people living it. It spread because it produced more people. More mouths fed, even if each of those people was shorter, sicker, and working harder than their hunter-gatherer ancestors had. Once one group settled and grew in number, they could outcompete, displace, or simply outnumber the groups still living the older way. Not through better lives, through sheer demographic weight. Agriculture also created something hunter-gatherer life never really allowed, a surplus that could be stored, controlled, and hoarded by a few. Grain sitting in a storehouse can be guarded. It can be taxed. It can be inherited by one person's children and denied to everyone else's. For the first time, some humans could accumulate far more than they personally needed, while others working the very same land had far less. This is likely where the earliest real social hierarchies took root. Kings, priests, and private property, in roughly that order. Anthropologist Polly Wiesner has documented how hunter-gatherer societies maintained constant social pressure against anyone trying to rise too far above the group. Teasing, gossip, and storytelling that quietly punished arrogance and leveled out status before it could calcify into real power. Agriculture broke that balance. Once food could be stored and defended behind walls, those old leveling mechanisms started to disappear, and they never fully came back. So agriculture didn't just change what humans ate. It changed who held power. It changed how many hours a person had to work just to stay alive. It changed what diseases moved through a population, how tall people grew, and how unequal a single human life could become compared to the one standing next to it. And in a strange way, almost none of that ever fully reversed. You still live inside the world that decision built. The 8-hour workday instead of the 4-hour foraging trip. The paycheck stockpiled in a bank account instead of grain stockpiled in a granary. The widening gap between people with surplus and people without. All of it traces back to choices made by small farming communities more than 10,000 years ago. Choices you never made. In a system you were simply born into. The same way the first farmers never chose all the consequences that came from planting that first field of wheat. The Jew/Hoansi that Richard Lee studied in the 1960s didn't have less than you. In some ways, they had more. More rest. More unscheduled time with the people around them. More days that genuinely belonged to them, instead of to an employer, a deadline, or a debt. They just measured wealth differently. Not by what a person owned, but by how much of their own time was actually theirs. So the next time you're running on empty at the end of a long workday, picture that field outside Catalhoyuk, 11,000 years ago. The people standing in it believed they were building security for their children, for their numbers, for the species as a whole. In a way, they were right. Humanity scaled because of what they started. But security for the species and a good life for the individual turned out to be two very different things, and we have been living with that gap ever since. You don't carry a sickle into your day. You carry a laptop, or a badge, or a uniform. But the trade those first farmers made, more food, less freedom, is the same trade still shaping nearly every waking hour you spend today. Maybe the real question was never whether agriculture saved humanity. Maybe it's whether it ever actually worked for the humans living inside it.